Princess Zyra stood on the observation deck of the Zarnathi warship, staring down at the ruined battlefield below. Smoke rose in thick, dark clouds, twisting into the alien sky. The ground was littered with broken weapons, shattered armor, and the lifeless bodies of Zarnathi warriors, her people. Her sharp claws gripped the golden rail as her mind tried to make sense of what had happened. They had outnumbered the humans 10-1. Their warriors were elite, trained since birth, bred for war. The Zarnathi Empire had conquered dozens of worlds without struggle. No species had ever resisted them like this. And yet, here they were, defeated, her golden eyes fixed on the lone figure standing among the wreckage. A human. He was not tall like the Zarnathi, nor did he have the strength of their warriors. His armor was damaged, covered in dirt and blood. His helmet was missing, revealing his face. Short, dark hair, a strong jaw, and eyes that held no fear, only determination. Zyra felt something deep inside her react. Her skin tingled. Her heart pounded in a way she didn't understand. Her claws twitched. She turned away suddenly and rushed to the nearest cleansing chamber. The Zarnathi had a deep-rooted instinct. When they felt completely overwhelmed by a presence greater than them, their bodies reacted on their own. Their ancestors had done it when faced with a superior predator. Their warriors sometimes did it after losing a great battle. And now she was doing it after simply looking at a human soldier. As the cleansing waters rushed over her skin, she closed her eyes and took slow breaths. This is impossible. The humans were supposed to be inferior. That's what she had been taught. Their empire was small, their bodies weaker, their technology outdated. And yet, they fought with such brutality, such cleverness, that even the greatest Zarnathi generals feared them. Zyra had never believed the rumors before. Now she wasn't sure what to believe. Back on the battlefield, Sergeant Daniel Carter stood motionless, scanning the wreckage. His squad had moved on, but he stayed behind, watching the enemy ship hovering in the sky. He knew they were watching him. He could feel it. He had fought many battles, faced countless enemies, but the Zarnathi were different. They were proud, ruthless, and they never surrendered. This battle was supposed to be their victory, but humans had a way of ruining expectations. Carter exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders. His body ached, but he was used to it. Pain was temporary. Victory was what mattered. He glanced up at the warship again, narrowing his eyes. He had a feeling this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Princess Zyra sat in the War Council chamber, her expression unreadable. The Zarnathi generals spoke in angry, hushed voices, trying to make sense of their defeat. The humans are unpredictable. One of them growled. They do not fight like other species. They should have broken under our assault, another hissed. Instead, they adapted. They changed their tactics. They fought even harder when they were wounded. What kind of species does that? Zyra's claws tapped against the table. She already knew the answer. Humans. It wasn't just their weapons or their strategies. It was something else. They had a fire inside them that no other species possessed. They refused to kneel. Even in the face of death, they laughed. They pushed forward. They refused to stop. And worst of all, they were winning. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the human soldier on the battlefield. His stance, his presence. Something about him had shaken her, something she could not explain. When she opened her eyes again, she knew what she had to do. "I want to see them up close," she announced. The room fell silent. The generals turned to her, stunned. "Princess, you cannot be serious," one said. "The humans are dangerous." "That is exactly why I must see them," she replied. "If we do not understand them, we will never defeat them." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the generals nodded. And so, it was decided. Princess Zyra would go to the battlefield, and she would come face to face with the humans. With him. Princess Zyra stood on the bridge of her warship, staring at the holographic map of the battlefield below. Red markers showed fallen Zarnathi forces, while the blue markers, representing the humans, still stood strong. Her claws tapped rhythmically against the smooth surface of the console. The war generals had tried to stop her from coming, but she had insisted. She needed to see them up close. Their movements do not make sense. General Vork hissed beside her. They should be predictable, yet they are not. Every time we attack, they change their strategy. Thyra nodded slowly. That was the terrifying part about humans. Other species followed patterns. The Zarnathi had spent decades perfecting their battle tactics against different alien civilizations. They always knew what to expect. But the humans, they adapted. Zyra's mind drifted back to the lone human soldier she had seen earlier, the one who had stood tall among the fallen, his expression unreadable. She didn't know his name, but she knew he had changed something in her. That feeling of unease returned, and she hated it. Sergeant Daniel Carter crouched behind a pile of rubble, his rifle steady in his hands. His squad was deep in Zarnathi-controlled territory, running a risky reconnaissance mission. Too risky, if you asked him. Eyes up, he muttered through the comms. They're watching. Yeah, no kidding. One of his teammates, privately, responded. I can feel their creepy lizard eyes on me. Carter smirked but didn't respond. He had learned one thing about the Zarnathi. They were proud warriors, but they weren't used to losing, and that made them dangerous. He scanned the area through his visor. Something was off. The Zarnathi were aggressive, but today they were too quiet. No surprise ambushes, no sudden attacks. Just waiting. His instincts screamed trap, and his instincts were rarely wrong. Zyra watched from the shadows as the human soldiers moved through the ruined city. She had disguised herself in a light combat suit, blending in with the environment. No royal symbols, no guards, just her and her curiosity. She had seen humans through war reports and distant surveillance, but this was her first time standing so close to them. She expected them to be crude, barbaric, perhaps even reckless. But instead, she saw something far more dangerous. They were coordinated. Their movements were fluid. They communicated with subtle gestures, covering each other, scanning every corner with a precision that rivaled even the most elite Zarnathi squads. They weren't just warriors. They were survivors. Her gaze landed on one human in particular, the same soldier from before. His presence was different from the others. He moved with confidence, yet there was something calm about him. Something unshakable. Sergeant Carter. She didn't know his name, but she would learn it soon enough. Because today, she had a mission. She was going to test a human firsthand. Carter's fingers tightened around his rifle as a flicker of movement caught his eye. Something was here. He didn't know how, but he could feel it. Stay sharp, he whispered. We've got company. The moment he spoke, the attack came. A Zarnathi warrior lunged from the shadows, plasma blade slicing through the air. Carter ducked, rolling to the side just as the energy weapon cut through the stone where he had stood. His squad reacted instantly. Gunfire erupted as more Zarnathi warriors appeared from the ruins, their ambush triggered. Carter fired a precise shot, taking down an attacker. Too easy. His gut told him this wasn't a normal assault. Someone else was watching. Then he saw her. A Zarnathi figure stood on a higher platform, observing the battle. She wasn't fighting. She wasn't even giving orders. She was watching him. And somehow he knew. She was different. Zyra's breath caught in her throat as she watched Carter fight. He was fast. Faster than she had expected. He reacted before danger even reached him, moving like he had already seen the battle unfold in his mind. Her claws twitched at her sides. This is why we are losing. It wasn't just their weapons or numbers. It was their ability to think, to react, to fight beyond logic. The Zarnathi fought with tradition. Humans fought with instinct. And they were winning. Her gaze met Carter's for the briefest moment across the battlefield. He saw her, not just as another enemy soldier, but as someone important. Her heart pounded, and before she could stop herself, she stepped back into the shadows. She needed to leave. Now. She had seen enough. For the first time in her life, Princess Zyra felt something strange. Something she had never expected to feel toward a human. Respect. The warship's halls were silent, but Princess Zyra's mind was loud with thoughts. She had watched a human fight up close. Sergeant Carter. He was unlike any warrior she had ever seen. His movements, his awareness, the way he commanded his team, it was unnatural. The Zarnathi trained their soldiers for years, but this human fought like he was born for battle. And the worst part? He had seen her, not just noticed her presence, he had recognized her. In that brief moment, as their eyes met across the battlefield, he had known she wasn't just another soldier. She was something more. She clenched her jaw. It was dangerous to let a human see her. Humans were observant, clever, dangerous. And yet, she wasn't afraid. She was curious. Sergeant Carter sat on a crate, cleaning his rifle. His squad was resting inside a ruined building, waiting for new orders. Private Lee sat beside him, stretching his sore arms. That was close today. Zarnathi usually don't ambush like that. They're changing tactics, Carter muttered, checking his ammo. They're watching us now, studying us. Lee raised an eyebrow. You think they're learning from us? Carter frowned. That was the worrying part. The Zarnathi were already strong warriors. But if they started adapting like humans, they would become even deadlier. And then there was the mystery figure he had seen on the battlefield. Zarnathi warriors were aggressive, but she had been calm. She wasn't there to fight. She was there to observe. Carter's instincts screamed that she was important, maybe even a commander, or something more. Zyra paced inside her chambers. She had questions, and only one way to get answers. She turned to her personal guard. Prepare a small team. We are going back to the battlefield. Her guards hesitated. Princess, that is too risky. She gave them a sharp look, and they immediately bowed their heads. As you command. She wasn't just going back to observe. This time, she was going to confront the human herself. Carter's team moved carefully through the ruins, searching for supplies. Something didn't feel right. The air was too still. No distant gunfire. No movement. Just silence. His grip tightened on his rifle. Stay sharp. Then, a flicker of movement. A shadow darted between the ruins. Carter barely had time to shop before the attack came. A Zarnathi warrior leaped from cover, slashing with a plasma blade. Carter dodged, rolling to the side. Another enemy lunged. His squad fired back. Gunfire erupted. Carter turned, aiming at an approaching figure. And then he saw her. The same golden-eyed Zarnathi from before. She wasn't attacking. She was watching him. For a moment, everything slowed. Their eyes met again, just like before. Then, before he could react, she moved. Fast, too fast. A sudden strike from behind knocked him off balance. The world spun. He hit the ground hard, his vision blurring. Then, darkness. Carter woke to the sensation of cold metal against his wrists. His hands were bound. His weapons were gone. And he was no longer in the ruins. He was inside a Zarnathi warship. Captured. He exhaled, flexing his fingers against the restraints. The room was dimly lit, but he could tell it was a holding cell. Smooth metal walls, reinforced doors, no obvious exits. Then, the door slid open, and she walked in, the golden-eyed Zarnathi. She stepped forward, her posture regal, but her gaze sharp. She studied him like a puzzle she was trying to solve. Carter smirked. I don't usually get this much attention on a first meeting. She blinked, clearly confused by his response. You are not afraid. Should I be? Carter shrugged. You could have killed me on the battlefield, but you didn't. She was silent for a moment, then said, I have questions. Carter raised an eyebrow. and capturing me was your best way to get answers. Sarah folded her arms. I need to understand humans. Carter chuckled. Yeah? Well, good luck with that. Even we don't fully understand ourselves. Her tail twitched slightly, a sign of frustration. Your kind is different. Carter tilted his head. Is that why you were watching me? Her gaze didn't waver. You fight like no other species. You do not break. Even when you are outnumbered, you continue. Why? Carter leaned back, considering his words. Then, with a small smirk, he said, because we don't know how to quit. Zyra's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. A flicker of understanding, and perhaps something more. Princess Zyra stood in front of the captured human, arms crossed, golden eyes locked onto his. Sergeant Daniel Carter sat on the cold metal bench, hands still bound, but his posture relaxed. He didn't look afraid. If anything, he seemed amused. That irritated Zyra more than she expected. She had been trained to deal with prisoners. Most species, when captured, showed fear or desperation. They would beg for freedom, try to bargain, or grow aggressive. But this human, he smirked, as if he were still in control. Zyra stepped closer. Do you realize your position, human? Carter tilted his head. Yeah, I'm sitting in a cell, talking to a princess who thinks I'm interesting enough to capture instead of kill. Zyra's tail flicked, a sign of mild frustration. I captured you because I need to understand humans. Carter chuckled. Still figuring us out. She narrowed her eyes. You are unpredictable. That makes your kind dangerous. He smirked again. Or maybe that makes us interesting. For a moment, silence filled the room. Zyra hated to admit it, but there was truth in his words. The Zarnethi had fought dozens of species, but humans were different. They didn't just fight with strength. They fought with adaptability, creativity, and pure stubbornness. And Carter, standing in front of her, was proof of that. Outside the holding cell, General Vork stood with his arms behind his back, watching the security feed. He did not approve of the princess's actions. Capturing the human was risky, but allowing him to live, to speak, that was foolishness. Princess Zyra is making a mistake, he muttered. One of his officers nodded. Shall we prepare for interrogation, General? Vork shook his head. No, we will observe her first. If she fails to learn anything useful, we will take control. The human would break eventually. They all did. Back in the cell, Zyra studied Carter closely. She could see no fear in him, no hesitation. This human was different from any warrior she had ever met. She decided to change her approach. Tell me, human, why do your kind fight so fiercely? Carter raised an eyebrow. You invaded our planet. You expected us to roll over and let you win. Zyra frowned. Other species surrendered. They knew they could not defeat the Zarnethi Empire. Carter leaned forward slightly. Yeah, well, humans don't like being told when to quit. That made Kyra pause. She had seen it on the battlefield. Humans didn't just fight. They refused to lose. Even when they were outnumbered, even when the odds were against them. She crossed her arms. What is it that drives you? Honor. Revenge. Carter's smirk faded slightly. He exhaled and looked her in the eye. Survival. Sarah tilted her head. We fight because we have to, Carter continued. We fight for our families, our people. We fight because if we don't, we lose everything. For the first time, Zyra hesitated. She had expected arrogance, anger, not honesty. The Zarnethi fought for conquest, for glory. Humans, they fought for each other, and that made them dangerous. Carter watched the Zarnethi princess carefully. She had power, authority, but something told him she wasn't like the others. She wanted to understand. That meant she wasn't like the war-hungry generals leading this invasion. Maybe, just maybe, she could be reasoned with. He decided to push further. You ever wonder what happens if we win? He asked. Zyra blinked. Win? Carter shrugged. Yeah. What happens if the humans push you back? If your empire realizes Earth isn't worth the fight? Zyra's jaw tightened. The Zarnathi do not retreat. Carter smirked. Neither do humans. Their eyes locked. For the first time, Zyra understood the problem. The Zarnathi wouldn't stop fighting, and neither would the humans. This war wouldn't end until one side was completely destroyed. Zyra didn't know why, but for the first time since the war began, she felt something she had never expected. Doubt. Was she on the right side of history? Outside the cell, General Vork watched the conversation unfold. His expression darkened. The princess was hesitating. That was unacceptable. He turned to his officers. Prepare the interrogation chamber. If the princess does not break the human, we will. Sergeant Daniel Carter sat on the cold metal bench of his cell, arms resting casually on his knees. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't stupid either. He knew this situation could turn bad fast. Princess Zyra had been questioning him for a while now, trying to understand humans. But Carter knew something she didn't. The Zarnathi military wasn't patient. If they didn't get what they wanted from him soon, they would take him away from this cell. And he doubted that conversation would be as polite. The door slid open. Zyra stepped inside, her golden eyes scanning him with curiosity. But today, something was different. She looked troubled. She was hiding something. Carter smirked. You look like someone who just found out their battle plans aren't working. Zyra's tail flicked behind her, betraying her emotions. You think this is a game, human? No, Carter said, his tone calm. I think your people are getting impatient. Zyra hesitated, then spoke carefully. General Vork does not approve of my methods. Carter leaned back. Yeah, I figured. He's the kind of guy who doesn't ask questions, just breaks things until he gets what he wants. Zyra didn't respond. That was all the confirmation Carter needed. They're going to take me, aren't they? He asked. A long silence filled the room. Then, finally, Zyra nodded. Outside the cell, General Vork was losing patience. This is pointless, he growled. The princess wastes time speaking to the human as if he is an equal. He will not break like this. One of his officers nodded. Shall we proceed with the enhanced interrogation methods? Vork's reptilian lips curled into a smirk. Yes. If the princess cannot get results, we will. Prepare the chamber. The officer bowed. And the princess? Vork's eyes narrowed. She will not interfere. Back in the cell, Zyra took a step closer to Carter. You do not understand what is coming, she said. Carter's smirk faded slightly. Then explain it to me. Zyra clenched her fists. If General Vork takes control, you will not be questioned. You will be broken. Carter exhaled, nodding. He had expected this. He had been trained for this. But hearing it directly from her made it more real. You have a choice, Zyra continued. Give them something. Anything. And you may survive. Carter shook his head. Not an option. Zyra stared at him. Why? Carter met her gaze. Because if I talk, more of my people die. Zyra felt something strange at that moment. She had always thought of humans as dangerous, but now she saw something else. Loyalty, determination, strength. She took a deep breath. Then you will die. Carter grinned. Yeah, but at least I'll go down knowing I didn't betray my people. Zyra felt a sharp pang of frustration. She didn't want to admit it, but she respected this human. She didn't want to see him die, but she was running out of time. Hours later, the cell doors opened. Carter barely had time to react before Zarnathi guards stormed in. Two of them grabbed his arms, pulling him to his feet. Princess, you need to leave, one of them said. Zyra's eyes widened. Where are you taking him? To General Vork. Carter smirked. Told you they'd get impatient. Zira felt something cold in her chest. She had seen the general's methods before. No human could survive them. She turned to the guards. I am still in charge of this prisoner. Release him. The guards hesitated. Our orders are from General Vork himself. Syra snapped. I am your princess, she roared, her voice filled with authority. Release him. Now. The guard stepped back, confused. Then, a voice came from behind. You are making a mistake, princess. Zyra turned sharply. General Vork stood at the doorway, arms crossed, his eyes filled with disapproval. This human is a prisoner of war, Vork said. He is not your pet. He is not your ally. Zyra's tail flicked behind her, a sign of anger. He is my prisoner, and I will decide what happens to him. Vork's expression remained cold. You are young. You do not understand what must be done. Carter, still held by the guards, watched the argument silently. He could tell one thing. This was about power. And Zyra was losing control. Vork took a slow step forward. You know the truth, princess. The humans will not stop. They will fight until they are extinct. Do you really believe they deserve mercy? Zyra hesitated. That hesitation was all Vork needed. He turned to the guards. Take him to the interrogation chamber. The princess has had her chance. The guards dragged Carter away. Zyra did nothing. She just stood there, watching. And for the first time in her life, she felt powerless. Carter was shoved into a dark room, metal cuffs locking his hands above his head. He could hear the hum of energy weapons powering up. A shadow stepped forward. General Vork. The older Zarnathi smirked. Let's see how long your human pride lasts. Carter clenched his jaw. He had been trained to endure pain, but he wasn't naive. He wasn't getting out of this alive. Back in her chambers, Princess Zyra paced restlessly. Her mind was in chaos. Why did she care what happened to the human? Why did his words keep echoing in her head? We don't know how to quit. She stopped. Then, with a deep breath, she made a decision. She would not let Carter die. She would not let Vork win. It was time to make a choice, and she chose the human. Princess Zyra moved quickly through the halls of the Zarnathi battleship. Her golden eyes were focused, her mind racing. She knew what she was about to do was treason, but she didn't care. Sergeant Daniel Carter didn't deserve to die in General Vork's interrogation chamber. He had shown something that many warriors lacked: honor. And now, Zyra had to make a choice. Would she stay silent and let him suffer? Or would she act? Her hands clenched into fists. She had already decided. She would save him. Inside the interrogation chamber, Carter gritted his teeth. The pain was sharp but not unbearable. Not yet. Vork stood in front of him, arms behind his back. He wasn't in a hurry. He was enjoying this. You humans are stubborn, Vork said, but that will not save you. Carter forced a smirk, though it was getting harder to hold onto his usual confidence. Yeah, and what's your plan? Keep shocking me until I tell you my grandma's secret cookie recipe. Vork didn't react. He simply gestured to the guards. Another jolt of electricity surged through Carter's body. His muscles tensed, his vision blurred, but he didn't scream. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Vork sighed. Foolish. Your people will lose this war. You should be grateful that we are giving you a chance to surrender. Carter spat blood onto the floor. Yeah, well, we don't do surrender. Vork narrowed his eyes. Then you will die. Before he could give the next order, the room's lights flickered. Vork turned his head slightly. What is happening? The guards exchanged confused glances. Then, boom! An explosion rocked the ship. The door to the chamber suddenly slid open. And standing there, weapon in hand, was Princess Zyra. Her tail flicked aggressively, her golden eyes burning with defiance. Enough, General. Vork's expression darkened. What is the meaning of this? Zyra took a step forward. I am taking the human. Stand down. Vork's laugh was low and mocking. You have lost your mind, princess. This is treason. Scifi raised her blaster. Perhaps. The guards hesitated. They were loyal to Scifi, but they also feared Vork. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Carter chuckled. Took you long enough, princess, he said, his voice weak but still filled with amusement. Scifi rolled her eyes. You humans always talk too much. Then, without warning, she fired. The guards barely had time to react before the energy blast hit the first one in the chest. He collapsed instantly. The second guard reached for his weapon, but Carter, despite his restraints, kicked him hard, sending him stumbling. Scifi moved fast. In seconds, she was beside Carter, unlocking his restraints. As soon as his arms were free, Carter grabbed a fallen guard's weapon. Now they were both armed. Now they had a chance. Vork's face was unreadable, but his voice was cold. You are making a mistake, Scifi. Scifi didn't hesitate. No, General. You did. She fired again. Vork barely dodged the blast, taking cover behind a console. We need to move, Scifi shouted. Carter nodded. Lead the way, princess. They ran. Alarms blared through the battleship. Carter and Scifi sprinted through the corridors, taking out any guards that got in their way. You got a plan? Carter asked as he ducked behind cover, returning fire. Scifi didn't stop moving. Escape pods. Carter grinned. Now you're talking. More guards appeared ahead. Scifi fired first, her shots precise. Carter followed, covering their flank. For the first time, they were fighting together. The battle wasn't just about survival. It was about trust. And somehow, despite being enemies just hours ago, they trusted each other. They'd reached the hangar. Rows of small escape pods lined the walls. But more guards were arriving. Carter cursed. Too many. Scifi's eyes scanned the room. Then she spotted something. The fighters, she said. Carter followed her gaze. A row of small Zarnathi attack ships were docked nearby. He grinned. Now that's more my style. They sprinted towards one of the ships. The cockpit opened automatically as Scifi input the command. Get in, she shouted. Carter didn't hesitate. He jumped into the co-pilot seat, hands moving over the unfamiliar controls. Hope you know how to fly this thing, princess. Scifi smirked. Better than you, human. She activated the engines. The ship roared to life. Guards opened fire, but Scifi was faster. She took off, blasting through the hangar doors. They were free. For now. Back on the battleship, General Vork stood silently in the hangar, watching them escape. His expression was calm, but his tail twitched slightly, a rare sign of rage. A nearby officer approached nervously. Shall we pursue them, General? Vork's eyes narrowed. No, let them run. The officer hesitated. Sir. Vork's voice was cold and calculated. The princess has made her choice. She is a traitor now. And the humans. He turned to face his officers, his expression unreadable. They will never accept her. He smirked. She has nowhere to go. Inside the stolen fighter, Carter exhaled. All right, princess. We're out. Now what? Scifi's hands gripped the controls tightly. Her home, her empire, was behind her. The humans. They would never trust her. For the first time, she had no plan. She looked at Carter. Now, we survive. Carter nodded. Sounds like a good start. The stolen Zarnathi fighter disappeared into the darkness of space. The stolen Zarnathi fighter streaked through space, its engines burning bright against the vast darkness. Inside the cockpit, Sergeant Daniel Carter and Princess Scifi sat in tense silence. Carter was focused on the controls, trying to make sense of the alien technology in front of him. Scifi, on the other hand, was lost in thought. She had done the unthinkable. She had betrayed her people. She had saved a human. And now she was a traitor to the Zarnathi Empire. Carter glanced at her. You doing all right, princess? Zaira blinked, snapping out of her thoughts. I just gave up everything I've ever known. What do you think? Carter smirked. I think you made the right call. Zaira sighed. Then why does it feel like I just signed my own death sentence? Carter adjusted the controls, setting a new course. Because you did. But don't worry. I do that kind of thing all the time. Zaira gave him a sharp look, but she couldn't hide the small smile tugging at her lips. Back on the Zarnathi battleship, General Vork stood in the command center, watching the tracking data of the stolen fighter. The human and the princess had managed to escape, but he wasn't worried. They won't get far, he muttered. An officer stepped forward. Shall we send ships after them? Vork shook his head. No, not yet. The officer frowned. But, General. Vork glared, and the officer fell silent. The princess is alone now, Vork continued. Her people will not welcome her back. The humans will never trust her. He turned towards the viewport, staring into the endless black of space. She has nowhere to go. And when she was desperate enough, he would be waiting. Back in the fighter, the ship's scanners beeped. Carter leaned forward. Looks like we've got company. Zaira's heart clenched. Zarnathi. Carter checked the readings. No, human ships. Zaira's tail twitched. Will they fire on us? Carter considered it. Probably. We did steal an enemy fighter. Zaira exhaled. Great. Carter flicked a switch, opening a comm channel. This is Sergeant Daniel Carter, Terran Defense Forces. I'm aboard a Zarnathi fighter, but I am not your enemy. There was a long pause. Then a harsh voice crackled through the speakers. Carter, is that really you? Carter grinned. Yeah, it's me, Commander Blake. Mind telling your boys not to shoot? A second later, the human warships adjusted course, forming an escort around the stolen fighter. We'll bring you in, Carter, Blake said. Then his voice turned cold. But that thing in your ship, she's staying in chains. Zaira's fists clenched. She had expected this. Carter's expression hardened. Blake, listen to me. Zaira saved my life. She's the reason I got out of there alive. She's a Zarnathi. Blake snapped. She's the enemy. Carter's grip tightened on the controls. No, not anymore. Silence. Then Blake spoke again. Bring the ship in, Carter. We'll figure this out once you land. The comm cut off. Zaira sighed. So much for a warm welcome. Carter smirked. Don't worry. I've talked my way out of worse. Zaira shook her head, but despite herself, she felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a place for her after all. Aboard the human warship, the moment Carter and Sarah stepped off the fighter, dozens of weapons were aimed at them. Zaira didn't move. She had expected hostility, but seeing the hatred in their eyes made her stomach twist. Carter raised his hands. Easy, guys. We're all on the same side here. Blake stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He looked at Carter, then at Zaira. Then he spoke. The general wants to see you. Carter frowned. Which general? Blake's eyes darkened. All of them. The last stand. Zaira had spent her life in royal courts, surrounded by nobles and warriors who followed her every command. Now she stood in chains, surrounded by humans who saw her as nothing more than an enemy. Across from her, a table of high-ranking human officers sat in silence. They were watching her, judging her. Finally, one of them spoke. Why should we trust you? Zaira met his gaze. Because I had a choice. Silence. Zaira took a deep breath. I could have let Carter die. I could have returned to my people, followed my orders, and continued this war. She lifted her chin. But I didn't. She glanced at Carter, then back at the generals. I made a choice. I chose to fight for something better. One of the generals scoffed. And what exactly do you want? Zaira took a step forward. I want to end this war. A new beginning. The decision wasn't made that day. It took weeks of questioning, interrogations, and endless suspicion. But Carter stood by Xyra every step of the way. And in the end, the humans listened. Xyra wasn't trusted, not yet, but she was given a chance to prove herself, to fight for something greater than her empire. One day, she would return to her people, not as a princess, but as a warrior who chose peace over war, a warrior who fought for humanity. And for the first time in her life, Xyra knew who she truly was.